Welcome to the GCN Tech Clinic, where we aim to answer your bike tech and maintenance related questions. As ever, you can submit your questions down below in the comments section using the hashtag askgcntech, and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as possible
within the allotted time.
But this week's a special edition because we're joined by engineer and all-round cycling nerd Josh Poertner from Silca, who's also going to be answering your questions. Let's
Good.
go.
Right. Straight in, Josh. No time to think. We've got first question from Simons Leia. They say, do chains, cassettes and chainrings wear out faster for heavier riders?
No, generally not. So people want to think, chain stretch, it's power related. It's really more a function of just how many miles and then how much dirt and grit is in there, since it's an abrasive wear process. Mm-hmm. So it's dirt and duration are way more effective, way more problematic than sheer load. And
really?
power.
That surprises me. So my immediate, off-the-cuff suggestion would have been that it does. But, I appreciate you saying it doesn't. What about if you were to look at extreme cases, like a really low-powered rider versus a really high-powered rider? Do you think in the extremes you could see a change or not really?
Think inside the chain, they're sprinting, climbing forces. You're talking 100,000 PSI. Maybe somebody's making 10% more power than the other. So maybe your range is 90 to 110. I think from the metals perspective, that's not a whole lot different. Now, from a grinding perspective, that potentially could be. I think the other thing to think about too is the smoothness. A lot of the chain testing and things that are done with motors, which is a smooth torque application. But of course, if you're a real gear masher and it's the guys that you can hear applying the power, you're getting more kind of peak and valley kind of. And again, once you get the abrasion in there or the grit in there to be abrasive, there's probably some marginal effect. But if you have on the group ride, you're making 240 watts and you're making 260 watts. That's 90% of the riding that you're doing. That's going to be about the same.
Yeah, fair.
So, nice.
All right, do you want to go to the next question?
Yeah, from Clive Wokes, who says, hey guys, love the show. Regarding the weight of a bike or body question, doesn't the weight of a rider impact the force on the pedals, especially when out of the saddle? I seem to remember, decades ago, I'm 77, that pro riders used to move their water bottles from their bikes to their back pockets before a climb. Also, have you noticed that many top pros back in the day have large noses? What? Is there an aero advantage to having a large nose?
This is a brilliant question. But can I just dive in firstly? I'm not aware that pro riders used to move their water bottles from their bikes. Perhaps that's something that sort of precedes my time in cycling. Is that a thing?
There was a belief way back that if you took the weight and put it on the rider and the rider was out of the saddle climbing, that was more mass to push each pedal stroke. I think when you really think about it, it's like you're doing one-legged squats and now you've just made yourself heavier. Yeah. And so it's kind of offsetting physiologically that you're just working harder for the same.
So if anything could be a negative.
I don't know if anybody's really studied it, but yeah, if anything, it might be more fatiguing.
Yeah.
Hard to say.
But the modern solution to this people do is literally just to get rid of the water bottle completely. Yeah. What about the aero noses though?
I would say kind of fun, ridiculous question, but then you see the thing that people are doing with the sunglasses. Oakley's got that one-piece splendid nose thing that actually you put it in the tunnel, makes a little bit of a difference.
Dylan Groenewegen.
Yes,
with
the Chicon.
Yeah. Batman
with that
thing.
Terrible 3D printed plastic thing. Get me started, things that should be banned or things like that. I got
a fun story to tell you guys. So when I was at Eurobike last year, I was speaking to, I cannot for the life of me remember his name, the guy real high up in the company, maybe even owns the company. And he explained that it was just this real last minute thing they did. Dylan basically asked them if they could make something. He just, like I said, they 3D printed it really quick. He was like, he hated it, didn't want it, gave it to him. And then the internet went mad.
Went crazy.
And it was everyone thought it was this massive pre-planned thing, but it wasn't. So there you go. Right, next question is from David Andrews 3707. Does sealant break down and become less effective over time? If so, how often should it be replaced?
Depends on the brand of sealant, the type of sealant, and your tire. So it depends, my favorite answer. The natural latex sealants will dry. They're generally better at sealing. They dry a little bit faster due to solvent loss through the casing. So you think of like it's solid latex, it's been liquefied with a solvent of some sort. And because the tire isn't perfectly sealed, the solvent will weep through.
What solvent do they mainly use?
It used to be ammonia. Now there's a ton of different chemicals, but I won't say. I only know what we use, and I'm not going to say what it is.
Yeah,
but it's not ammonia. But that, like the very early Stans sealant, though, it was basically ammonia and latex mixed together, and then they'd put some cornmeal and some other additives in there to, as like coagulants.
I feel like it would be an alcohol.
I can't even begin to guess. Josh is going to keep his cards close to his chest.
I will tell you the secret. So the natural latex ones, at least, they are very pH sensitive. And so the solvents that you use, you want to keep that pH up like 11 plus. And actually, it's one of the reasons that CO2 will harden the solvent is that it drops. It's acidic, right? And so it drops the pH quickly. It's the other reason, like if you have liquid latex sealant on your hands and you put it under water, it will harden on contact with the water because the water is basically neutralizing the pH, and then you can peel it off.
I had no idea about that.
Yeah, but it's that solvent, and this is the other thing that people get caught out with. A lot of these tubeless ready tires, I like to say, the factories made them 90%, but you're making the last 10% at home with your sealant. And so you set it up, you run it with the sealant, and you get all that weeping through the sidewalls. That is the sealant essentially sealing the casing for good because the casing otherwise wouldn't have been airtight. But you have all of that surface area where all of that solvent is now coming through. And so that can cost you, a sealant that maybe lasts, 3-4 months might only last 3 or 4 weeks after setup because there's just been so much lowering of the pH and so much loss of the solvent. And so if you have weeping on setup, you really want to replenish that solvent quickly or it's going to dry out super fast.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. I'm just amazed by sitting between two absolute chemistry nerds. Yeah. Right. I've actually got a handful of questions from some of us here at GCN as well that we wanted to pick your brains for. The first one I want to go is from Sai, and prepare for this question. I think you might be shocked slightly. Sai is saying, has Josh ever considered WD-40 to be a good chain lube? Now, I'll give you a little bit of context here. Years and years and years ago, I don't know how many ago, Sai made a video explaining like a quick way of cleaning and lubricating a chain using WD-40, and basically the internet is still traumatized by it.
He said that for most of his career he used WD-40 as his lube of choice.
So I think from that point, over to you.
I've seen that video, and it's hard not to have an emotional reaction. For starters, WD-40 really is not a lubricant.
Okay.
It's not even meant to be a lubricant. I think, as we've grown up, certainly in my household growing up, that was the lubricant that you had. But, the WD stands for water displacing. It was really meant to be a corrosion preventative and, to some extent, a corrosion kind of stopper, right? So you take that rusty thing and hit it with this to sort of stop it from corroding or stop the corrosion that's onset. It has silicone in it, so there is like a little bit of lubricity to it, but it's super low viscosity. It's very thin, what's left behind, and it's very quickly displaced by load. So it's lubricious to a certain extent for very short periods of time, but again, the load that happens inside of your chain can be 100,000 PSI, kind of in the pin to bushing contact area. WD-40 is displaced and destroyed almost immediately. So I'll give it to Sai. It's probably a pretty good chain lube for about 3 minutes.
Maybe just short races.
And yeah, so if you're, you're needing to, 4K pursuit or something, WD-40 might survive. It's still not fast, but it might survive it. I would not give it.
So no use cases for this at all.
Where I'll say it's a good use case for that, we see a lot of triathlon in particular, but even some road racing, like you do your Ironman triathlon in the rain, and you've got to put the bike on the back of the car and drive home for 5 hours in the rain. You can and will get rusty chain if you're using like a wax-based lubricant or a dry lubricant. And so WD-40 can actually be a good rust preventative because, 10 hours of rain exposure on a chain, you're probably getting some little surface pitting, things like that. I know some people will like spray it on a cloth and wipe the outside of the chain just to add sort of a protective anti-corrosion layer. But yeah, I wouldn't use it as a lubricant.
All right. So I also go with a second question he said was a bit more serious and you would be less upset about. Was, in your opinion, do you think there's any way that you can feel the differences in carbon layup compared to what's technically measurable? I know that's a pretty broad and tricky subject, so I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
Yes and no. I think if you're taking it to the absolute edge of the technology, like Formula One level layup and control and autoclaving, and there are some companies doing that, you can feel subtle differences there in kind of the springiness of the frame, the little bit of the flex. I mean, we studied this years ago with Cervelo test team, and if you didn't tell them what to feel, they just came up with the craziest awesome stuff, right? And so, that was a lesson I certainly learned. Like, if you blind the test, almost nobody can tell you anything.
Really?
I
would have long suspected that.
Yeah, I mean, Cervelo they had a bike, I think it was the R3 at the time, and they had two of them that were a factor of 2 different in stiffness at the bottom bracket, and had the guys ride them and didn't tell them which one was which. And if you've ever done these things, you set it up, well, this is the new bike and it's got 10% better torsional stiffness at the head tube, and they'll come back and they'll be like, oh, it's really got great mid-corner control over the bumps or whatever. When it's blind and the bikes are rattle canned and you're not telling them anything, they come back and with just the most amazingly made up shit that's like,
oh man,
well, it's definitely stiffer, but maybe when I'm out of the saddle, maybe it's less stiff. And then, it's like everything gets qualified because I think we just don't feel what we think we can feel. What I will say is you can tell the cheap bikes, counterfeit bikes, things with a lot of voids and wrinkles in them, that contributes to like a really dead kind of a ride. You can almost hear the difference, when the layup is bad. And so I would say that's much more of something that's real to people than, this bike has MR40 and this bike has MR60. Yeah. In a lot of those cases, and I've said it before, a lot of those factories, you're making maybe 2 or 3 levels of bike. It's the same layup. Maybe there's a credit card piece of MR60 in a chainstay, and they weigh them at the end. The light ones tend to have more resin squeezed out. That means you have fewer wrinkles. That bike might maybe get the premium, more expensive, whatever. Yeah. And because there's fewer wrinkles and less resin holding, it may actually be a little better riding bicycle than some of the others, but
that's more of like a construction process than the material then, I guess.
Exactly. Okay. But I think if you could really control it, I mean, I look at like what the F1 guys do, particularly with like front wing designs and compliance and things that they're really playing around the edges. Yeah, it is absolutely possible to use the carbon layup to tune incredibly specific stiffnesses and deflections into incredibly specific areas. I'd say there's maybe 2 or 3 bike manufacturers that have that level of manufacturing. So
interesting. Connor has got a bit of a question here. Do you want to add Connor's into the mix?
Yeah, Connor has asked. So Connor's got into chain waxing.
We've basically forced him into it.
We've done a job on him.
Yeah,
he's well into it. Connor's now asking advanced level chain waxing questions
for him.
He says, how effective is the strip chip on old cleaned chains? Like this is exactly how Connor wrote the question.
I copied and pasted this. Sorry.
This is how Connor writes. Does it provide that final bit of stripping pre-wax? Does the endurance add on to the wax have better durability in the rain? We're so mean to Connor.
Yeah, sorry, that's very unfair of us there.
But we do love Connor.
In fairness to him, it was a last minute question he sent.
I'm impressed you've changed him.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
That's right, yeah.
It's hard to say how effective strip chip is on old chains because strip chip was really designed around, we looked at what all the majors were using for the grease that they coat the chains at the factory. And so I can tell you 100% it will convert that into a wax or wax-like substance. Old chains, I have no idea what lubricant you've been putting on there before. Yeah. So there may be something on there that strip chip can't convert. So I would say there's
WD-40.
Yeah.
I mean, like as a silicone, right? Like strip chip will not convert silicone into a wax because that's not nobody's using that in their factory greases. So I think that's just the big uncertainty for us, where we're like, it might work, but it might not, and not knowing all of the details. And two, I mean, the testing for those things is really expensive and time consuming. So, it's not worth $100,000 to build out a matrix of all the lubricants that it could
do.
Just
do it on a new chain.
Do it on.
That's what it's for.
And what about endurance? The endurance chip, in terms of how that affects the wax's performance in rain.
So we're seeing about a 10 to 15% improvement in the rain with the endurance chip. Not enough to call it rain chip, or which I should put to you guys. We were actually working on a very wet specific thing, and internally everybody's calling it wet chip, or because that's a terrible name, and moist chip. I don't know,
moist chip.
Maybe it should just be made for UK weather.
We need a better name, but endurance chip. We know that it's better, but it was not better enough that we thought it warranted calling it out specifically as for rain. So, because you get about 2 to maybe as much as 3 times endurance or lifespan improvement in the dry.
Yeah.
And so relative to that, 10 to 15% improvement just seems like it's a little bit better, but it's marginal.
Okay. And then I've got a question here actually about gravel tyres and wheels aero. So I'm planning to do Unbound this year. Sort of like minor spoiler alert if anyone didn't realise. So I want to know your thoughts on the importance of an aero rim when you're using a big, fat, chunky tyre, say a 45 or 50 mil. Is it? I've got a conflicted mindset and thought process here. Like, is the carbon rim kind of becoming a bit redundant in terms of aero because the tyre's so massive, or is it even more important because the tyre's so massive it can act as a fairing more? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so we've actually tested this in the wind tunnel quite a bit. There's a video we did with Dylan Johnson on our channel, but it works. And I think the simplest way to think about it is, you pull an old aerodynamic handbook. If you just have a cylinder, which is terrible in a wind tunnel, you're getting this vortex shedding off the back, right, that sets up. If you just weld a plate to the back of that, it will control those vortices and actually be faster. Now, it's not nearly as fast as a wing or whatever, but it is a pretty notable improvement. And then the other thing you need to think about is on the back half of the wheel, the rim is the leading edge. And so, it's much more efficiently kind of cutting and splitting the air onto the tire in the back half. So you're getting a little added control in the front, a little improvement in the back. From all the testing we've done, it's absolutely worth it, provided it can hit all the other things, right? Like you've got a wide enough bead seat.
Yeah.
And, if you were to say, hey, I've got these, old 20 millimeter bead seat rims that are 60 millimeter with that versus a 25 or a 30 millimeter bead seat, like it starts to get a little bit more complicated from a tire performance perspective. But it absolutely matters. The other thing we found in the wind tunnel that's interesting is these gravel tires are really sensitive to tread design, and some of the bigger ones are actually faster than some of the narrower ones due to, I think, a combination of tread design, and you're starting to push, as they get larger, the Reynolds number of the flow gets higher, and you are maybe getting pushed into this thing we call the drag bucket. If you put the Reynolds plot out there, there's this place where it's what the Dimples are doing on the golf ball. They're kind of getting you out into this zone they call the drag bucket, where the air can stay attached a little bit better because there's a little bit more energy in the flow. So we haven't studied it enough to be able to say exactly what the mechanism is, but there are some 55 millimeter tires out there that are faster than 50s and even faster than a few of the 45s.
Wow.
Which surprised us, and I think
because the tread is serendipitously aero.
Yes, is accidentally, or maybe on purpose, although I've actually asked the companies and they were all like, really? So, so serendipitous is the right word.
So that sounds like an area that there's a lot of research that has been conducted I need to look into more, but also lots of unknowns and maybes that still need to be searched out in the future.
For sure.
Yeah. And generally,
still learning.
Wider is generally better, right? And I don't know, do you think we're going to get to the point where, do you think there's a point where going wider is then starts to become negative?
I mean, we're probably there at this 50-55. I mean, I think 55s are the kind of the future gravel tire. If you look back in the history of it, I think we probably made a little bit of a mistake that gravel was like road, only tougher. And what we really probably should have done was think of mountain bike a little lighter weight. I think we just came at it from the wrong direction. And so, a lot of these gravel tires that you're seeing out on the market now, I mean, they're overly stiff. The casings are too much, but that was all designed because pressures were higher and all of that. I think if you take some of these 2.2, 2.25 mountain tires and you actually make them faster rolling, a little bit lighter weight, they become amazing gravel tires. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the market, but there is a point at which, you get to 2.4, 2.5, you really, the weight becomes hard to deal with. I mean, there's and you do just, if you're trying to make the tire light as it gets bigger, it's presenting casing more easily to the ground. And so at these low gravel pressures that you would want to run, you start to risk sidewall cuts and things like that, which then makes them have to extend the tread over more of the tire, which then makes it heavier, which then makes it slower rolling. So I think 55 is probably the sweet spot.
Right, I'm mindful we've been talking for a long time. The last couple of questions that we got from users underneath videos.
I'll just do one more.
All right, one more. Last one then.
Last one.
Jeff Jeddah 3161. They say, "Hey Alex and Ollie." We'll also add Josh into the mix. Says they ride in Zwift outdoors and they notice a discrepancy between their heart rate monitor on their chest strap and also their Apple Watch on the wrist. For example, they'll be on Zwift riding with a heart rate of 79, and then the Apple Watch is reading 139 beats when they're saying they've noticed similar issues outdoors. Is this normal?
Yeah.
So effectively, let's have an explainer here. I know you're itching to answer this question.
Well, no, so wrist strap optical heart read monitors, which is the mechanism by which the Apple Watch works, aren't very accurate. So a lot of wearable devices use that kind of technology and they're not very accurate. And that is a problem with them. So it's much more likely that your Wahoo strap, especially if it's the new one, because the updated one's a lot better. What's the tracker? Was the ticker? Now it's the tracker. They're far more accurate. So I'd be much more willing to trust that than the one on your wrist.
They're sensitive to vibration, the watch ones, and so that you notice rough roads, gravel riding. We have a lot of chip and seal where I live, and I mean you're 400 beats a minute for you look at the graph sometimes and it's crazy. So just trust the strap.
Mega. Right, that has been a bit of a longer Tech Clinic for this week. Josh, it's been mega to have your thoughts and input on some of these questions as well. As always, I say this every single week. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to your question, but be persistent. Put it in the comment section down below and we'll get to it in the coming weeks. Right, Ravi. See ya.
Bye.